We are back with 10 tenets of difficult conversations. Number 5, understand your emotional defaults. And number 6, rehearse. Let's talk about number 5.
It's good. Number 5, understand your emotional defaults. So I'm going to get all researchy for a second. What we found is that people in high pressure moments, oftentimes those pressure moments were conversations that were difficult for them, is that people have different defaults emotionally. And most of you are going to understand exactly who you are when I describe this, but some of us in certain systems of our lives tend to lean more heavily in those moments on making sure everyone else is happy and making sure everyone else is happy with us. And for those folks, having these conversations well can be difficult because there's a sense in which even being clear with another person that you're having to have this, you feel like I need to have this conversation, can feel like I've had people say who are like that, who wear those emotions of everyone else so heavily, say, I'm worried they'll think I'm mad at them. And so if their default is to maintain the peace and to make sure everyone else is happy, and more specifically, happy with them, then the thing to understand is that's your default. And we always start there, like, to understand that. Now, there are other people who default to less of a connection to what everyone else is thinking, needing, and feeling. And they default, or without intention, that's what we do. We default toward what they think. And so they enter into these conversations with a ton of clarity, a ton of what they want to see happen, but with a decreased capacity to actually pay attention to what's going on in the other person with whom they're having this conversation. So that's why just beginning by understanding what your default is kind of the starting place before this conversation occurs, so that when you feel like if you're that person who kind of soaks up the emotion of everybody else, trying to make everyone happy, you don't like this conversation, I don't want to have it because I'm going to lose sleep over it. Understanding that that's the way that you go will help you be more objective as you enter into this, because I would say your challenge is to be clear.
Yes.
To be clear, which we're going to talk about later. And for other folks where their default is more like to get a bit sort of more traditionally selfish, because by the way, they're both selfish defaults. The one who wants to make everyone else happy is trying to make everyone else happy because it makes them feel better.
Yep.
But the other person is more traditional selfish because it's like it's all going to be about us when we go into that conversation. So that's the first one. It was tenet number 6 or number 5 was understand your emotional default.
That's really, really interesting to think about. And I wonder if we could extend it to understanding where your emotional default is when met with resistance, when caught off guard, if they were to present information that you were completely unaware of.
Mm-hmm.
And you do you get angry? Do you get inquisitive? Do you back down and you kind of lose your step, right? And I think this type of thing is important for you to understand. If this happens, how will I respond? And then how should I respond? And what will be my tool, my mechanism for getting from here back to here to where I need to be to make this conversation very effective?
Yep. And this is also calling out that for us to assume, I have a problem with leadership books that say like, here's the one way to lead, or here's your 3 steps. And it's like, to assume that people are all like us is really missing a huge part of the human reality. And what we found is that these 2 emotional defaults were important because we also speak different languages around this, because you also understanding that someone else with whom you're having the conversation has their own defaults is important. And so understanding that, because we have different advice. If someone is that highly attentive to other kind of person, I called it in my book I called it the peacekeeper. Someone who wants to make sure everyone's happy. Their developmental challenge in this conversation, or their kind of the strategic direction, is to be clear.
Right.
That it is okay to be clear. And then for the other person is to say, you're not going to struggle with being clear, but your struggle will be remaining connected. Right. In that relationship. And so that's one of the reasons I think defaults is really important.
And I love this because it brings the first tenet, have a purpose, for you and for me.
Yes.
It brings it through. It's continuous, right? Like as we architect and plan for this conversation, we're looking at both people. I love that. Number 6, rehearse. Now, I don't rehearse anything, bro. Just letting you
You
know.
really don't? You really
I
don't?
don't. I don't. I did it once,
I guess that
and
doesn't surprise me.
then I got mixed up with my words when I was actually doing it, and my rehearsal in my head like fell apart, and then like I just died on stage. And my wife, when she knows I'm going to speak, like I'm at a conference, she's like, "What time do you speak?" I'm like, "I don't know." She's like, "Look it up," and then she's like going to be nervous for me during that time, like 5 states away. It's
Yeah.
weird.
Now I got a question for you. If you perceived it as if you knew that it was a conversation or an event that you were really nervous about, I know that, would you then rehearse?
I would definitely write down notes. I would architect it like this, right? I probably wouldn't talk with another person. However, all this prep work we've put in, especially when we talked about understanding emotional defaults and how will I react if that is, I think that qualifies as a rehearsal, don't you?
I do. And it's interesting. I bring up the higher stakes moments where you feel like the stakes are really high.
Yeah.
That's probably where I would suggest. I'm not saying rehearse all the time, but in a conversation that you perceive is very difficult for you to have, that's where the rehearsal will help you to stay on track when the conversation begins. Without the rehearsal, you may go down to all kinds of different rabbit trails. And so, I mean, you know this, like I speak often, so I don't rehearse all the time.
Right.
But last weekend, and you were instrumental in helping with me with as well, as I was in charge of the ceremony for my family member who had passed away, and I'd never done that before, and I felt the stakes were very high. And so,
Sure.
in a similar to this conversation, I needed to rehearse. Now, I didn't want to rehearse in front of someone else. In fact, my wife asked me, she said, "Hey, do you want to practice with me?" I really wanted her to hear it fresh. And so that was part of that reason.
Yeah.
But the rehearsal moments, like I was on an airplane and I went through it 3 times on the plane. I think people thought I was a crazy person because I'm like, I'm in the seat. I'm that weird person in the seat next to you doing that.
Well,
So,
and that's a good thing, right? Because I'm probably not going to rehearse in front of anybody. However, really important moments, really important parts, especially emotional transitions,
yeah,
or areas where I need you to understand and feel where I'm coming from or where I'm trying to go. Definitely, like anybody that's good at storytelling and engaging another person is going to rehearse those pieces just to make sure that they're translated and communicated well. So I think
yeah.
that really makes sense, actually. Okay, maybe I do rehearse. Come on, Rob. I just love